The sun rose over Earth as it did every morning. The cities were alive with the usual hustle and bustle. People heading to work, children going to school, and the sounds of daily life playing out on every street. The sky was clear, the air fresh, and the world, for all intents and purposes, was calm. The perfect image of peace. But in the eyes of the council, there was something deeper happening, something they had been observing for centuries. Humanity's strange obsession with politeness. For all their achievements and advancement, the people of Earth had somehow retained a calmness, an adherence to rules and norms that made them the perfect subjects for the Council's ongoing experiment. The Council had been watching Earth for longer than humanity even knew. From the safety of their distant observatories, they monitored every action, every speech, every thought, believing that this species, despite their occasional bursts of passion, was nothing more than a collection of rule followers, polite, docile, and ultimately controllable. The Council believed that humanity's nature was inherently peaceful, that their very existence was based on a series of unwritten social contracts that kept everything in check. Politely, quietly, they adhered to laws, avoided conflict, and existed without the primal violence that had characterized so many other worlds. For centuries, the Council believed they had made the right decision, leaving humanity alone while observing from afar. They kept a close eye on Earth, watching it evolve, convinced that humanity would never deviate from the path of politeness. After all, Earth was a planet that valued respect. Respect for the law, respect for authority, and respect for each other. But the Council didn't see what was brewing under the surface. They didn't see the mounting tension, the frustrations simmering just below the surface of that polite exterior. On a seemingly normal morning, as the world went about its daily routine, a small spark of defiance ignited in one of Earth's largest cities. It started quietly, a minor dispute between two strangers at a coffee shop. One person, a young woman, asked the other to move aside so she could grab a cup of coffee. When the man refused, she repeated her request. He responded with irritation, calling her rude and asking why she couldn't simply be more patient. The exchange was brief but loud enough to draw attention. For most people, it would have ended there. People would have returned to their daily routines, the event forgotten in moments. But something shifted. The man shoved the woman aside, and without thinking, she slapped him across the face. A ripple of surprise swept through the cafe, and the tension in the air was palpable. It wasn't just a slap. It was the sudden, violent rupture of what had been a smooth and controlled interaction, a moment of civility broken by anger. The other customers, instead of stepping in to diffuse the situation as they might have in the past, simply stood there, watching. Their eyes weren't full of concern. They were full of something else, curiosity, perhaps even a little thrill. The polite veneer that had always governed social interactions was slipping. No one moved to stop it. No one tried to calm the escalating situation. Instead, a few began recording it on their phones. It was a tiny thing, a small incident, but the damage was done. The seed of rebellion had been planted, and it was spreading. The Council's monitors, far from Earth, were already aware of the incident. They had been tracking human behavior for years, analyzing every subtle change in their social patterns. They were trained to recognize shifts in behavior, small anomalies that could indicate larger changes in the species' collective psyche. This was just one of many incidents they had logged over the years, a minor eruption of what appeared to be frustration, an outburst of anger. Certainly, nothing to worry about, right? But the Council had underestimated one thing: how deeply human beings, despite their outward politeness, were capable of bottling up their emotions. The Council had watched as Earth's population grew, city after city, nation after nation, all calmly maintaining their order. Yet they failed to account for what would happen when that calm was disrupted. The world's population had never truly been tested, not like this. No one had ever really pushed back against the established rules, until now. After that cafe incident, something strange began to happen. Reports started flooding in from all over the planet. In other cities, similar disputes were breaking out. Arguments over trivial things, a missed bus, a slight push in a crowded street, a disagreement over a parking space, suddenly turned into violent outbursts. People were no longer following the social contract. They weren't being polite anymore. They were snapping. The frustration of living under years of silence, of unspoken rules, had reached its boiling point, and the moment it broke, it spread like wildfire. The council, still in their distant observation posts, began to see the pattern. It wasn't just the occasional flare-up of anger. It was growing. Entire regions were beginning to fracture. Cities once known for their calm, measured responses were now filled with protests, shouting matches, and violence. It was as though humanity's polite mode had suddenly malfunctioned, leaving behind a raw, unpredictable energy. But there was something else the council didn't expect. The people of Earth didn't care. They didn't apologize. They didn't revert to their old selves. Instead, they began to form factions, groups of resistance that seemed to be born from this very eruption. They started organizing protests, attacking police officers, and tearing down statues of authority figures. The council watched with increasing alarm. The polite humanity they had studied was disappearing, and what was replacing it was something they could not control. But no matter how much the council monitored, no matter how many reports came in, they still couldn't see the full picture. They didn't understand the truth, that the humans' anger was not just the result of a single incident or a series of unfortunate events. It was a deeper, more profound shift in their society, one that had been building for years. Humanity had lost its politeness. The calm before the storm was over. What happened next would shock the council in ways they could never have predicted. The days after the incident in the cafe became a blur of unrest and chaos across Earth. What had started as a small spark in one city had now become a wildfire. In just a matter of days, humanity's polite facade had shattered. The streets of every major city had erupted into protests, arguments, and fights. The world had awoken to a terrifying truth. The politeness that had once defined them had vanished. In its place was a raw, unfiltered energy that no one could control. The council, still observing from their distant outpost, watched the growing chaos unfold in real time. They had been monitoring Earth for years, believing their influence had ensured that humanity remained docile and obedient. But now, their data was telling them something was terribly wrong. This wasn't just a few isolated incidents, it was a global phenomenon. Humanity's polite mode had been switched off, and the consequences were escalating rapidly. Governments tried to maintain order, but their usual methods of control were no longer working. The military, once a tool for keeping the peace, was now being overwhelmed by masses of angry, frustrated citizens. In one city, a police officer tried to stop a protester from blocking traffic. In the past, the protester would have quietly obeyed the officer's commands. But now, the protester shoved the officer aside and shouted back, "You can't control us anymore." The crowd cheered, and the officer, realizing he was no longer in control, backed off. It was a dangerous shift. People were no longer listening to authority figures. They were no longer willing to play by the rules. The protests, initially sparked by a few minor grievances, had turned into a global movement. The once quiet streets were now filled with people demanding change, often through violent means. Across the world, rebellious factions were forming, each fueled by the same burning desire to break free from the chains of authority. They no longer cared for the gentle diplomacy that the council had once admired in them. The resistance was growing, and it was becoming clear. Humanity had lost its patience. In the heart of every major city, the scenes were the same. People were pulling down statues of political leaders, tearing up government buildings, and storming military bases. The message was loud and clear. Humanity was done being polite. They were done being controlled. The council's panic. Back in their observation stations, the council members were scrambling. They had never expected this. Sure, they had seen uprisings before, planets that had rebelled against their rule. But nothing like this. Humanity had always been calm, always willing to follow orders, always polite. They had never imagined that the species they had so carefully monitored could suddenly turn against them. The council held an emergency meeting, their faces cold and calculating as they reviewed the data. "This isn't an isolated event," said one of the higher-ranking members. "There are uprisings in every major city on Earth. The patterns, they don't make sense. This isn't just anger. It's a total breakdown of social order." Another member added, "They'd gone beyond simple disobedience. This is something else, something primal. They've tapped into a force we thought they lacked." "Perhaps their civility was just a facade," a third member suggested. "And now that it's broken, they're showing us who they truly are." But why now? Why did this happen? The truth was simple. Humanity had been waiting. Years of being watched, controlled, and policed had built up a hidden anger in their hearts. The politeness that had defined them was never true peace. It was restraint. And once the council pushed too far, the floodgates opened. The rebellion wasn't just a reaction to a single event. It was the breaking point of a society that had been silently boiling over. The council's initial mistake had been underestimating the complexity of human nature. Politeness, they thought, was the true face of humanity. But the council had missed the deeper truth. Humans, like any other species, could only stay passive for so long. Now humanity was awake. They had tasted freedom, and they would never go back. The council had created their own worst enemy, and they had no idea how to stop it. The turning point. Meanwhile, the rebels on the ground were organizing. What started as isolated pockets of resistance had now formed into a global network. They had no centralized leadership, no clear ideology. They were simply united by one thing: the need to break free from the oppressive control of the council. A figurehead had emerged, though. He was a former scientist turned revolutionary, a man whose research had been stolen by the council years ago. He had become the face of the rebellion, known for his fiery speeches and ability to unite disparate groups into a single cause. His broadcasts, though mostly underground, were reaching millions of people. "They took our minds, our hearts, and our freedom," he would shout. "Now it's our turn to take back what is ours." His words were powerful, and they resonated with every person who had felt the sting of the council's interference. "Humanity has been polite for far too long," he continued in one of his most famous speeches. "Now we rise. We take back our future. We fight back." Across the globe, people responded. Streets that were once orderly and quiet became battlegrounds, as citizens took to the streets armed with whatever they could find. Barricades were set up, roads blocked, and the authorities were overwhelmed. Humanity was no longer playing by the council's rules. The game had changed. In the background, the council's forces began to mobilize. They were not accustomed to rebellion on such a scale. Their fleets of drones, once used to maintain order, now hovered ominously above the world's major cities. They deployed peacekeepers, soldiers in high-tech suits who had been designed for one purpose: to restore peace. But even as they landed in Earth's major cities, the soldiers were met with something unexpected. The people didn't flee or cower as they had in the past. They stood their ground. The final struggle begins. The council had made its first major misstep. They underestimated the strength of humanity's will to be free. They believed that the politeness they had seen on Earth for centuries was the true nature of the species. But what they didn't realize was that politeness was just a mask, a temporary layer of control. Beneath it was a fierceness, a fire that could not be extinguished. As the rebel forces clashed with the council's peacekeepers, the world began to watch the final moments of humanity's transformation unfold in real time. The Earth, once the calm and polite subject of the council's gaze, was now fighting for its survival. The polite facade had collapsed, and with it, the illusion that humanity could be controlled. Cliffhanger. The final scenes show humanity taking bold steps toward reclaiming their freedom. But with the Council's fleets preparing to strike back, the fate of Earth hangs in the balance. Will humanity's rebellious spirit be enough to drive the Council off their planet, or will they face a force more powerful than they ever imagined? The Council had no idea what was coming next, but they were about to find out. The world had officially crossed the line. No longer were they the docile, rule-abiding species the Council had studied for centuries. They were no longer restrained by politeness, no longer bowing to the systems of control that had governed them for so long. The streets were alive with a different energy, a raw, untamed power that rippled through the masses. What began as a few isolated protests had now turned into a full-blown global insurrection. Humanity had tasted rebellion, and they were unwilling to go back to the silence they had once endured. The Council, watching from the safety of their observation posts, now found themselves facing an unprecedented crisis. Their carefully crafted empire was unraveling at the seams, and they were powerless to stop it. They had always believed that humanity's polite nature was a weakness, something that could be exploited to maintain control. But now, it seemed that humanity's true strength had always been something they couldn't understand. The very thing the Council had dismissed as mere politeness had been the shield hiding the deep, unshakable resolve. In every corner of the earth, humanity was rejecting the Council's authority. Major cities, once controlled by the Council's peacekeepers, were now battlegrounds. Protests had morphed into outright conflicts. People were throwing off their shackles. The rebellious factions were united by one common goal: freedom. They no longer cared about the old systems. They wanted to reshape the world in their own image. In the heart of one of Earth's largest cities, a final stand was brewing. Rebel forces had fortified the city's central district, creating barricades, securing the roads, and preparing for a clash with the Council's elite forces. There was no turning back now. Earth's rebellion had become a global movement, with each city acting as a fortress of defiance. One group of rebels, led by the charismatic leader, was preparing for the most dangerous mission yet: to infiltrate the Council's command center and deliver a message that would shake the galaxy to its core. The mission wasn't just about taking down the Council. It was about making sure that no one, not even the Council itself, would ever forget the strength of humanity. The rebel leader's speech. In a dimly lit underground room, the rebel leader stood before a group of the most dedicated fighters. Their eyes were filled with determination, but there was also fear. Fear of what might happen, but also a fierce belief in the cause they were fighting for. "We've come this far," the leader said, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "The Council thought they could break us, that they could control us by simply watching from afar. They thought that as long as they kept us polite, they could keep us in line. But they were wrong. This is no longer about politeness. It's about freedom." The crowd murmured their agreement, nodding as the weight of the moment sank in. They wanted to control our minds, our hearts, our lives. But what they didn't understand is that our power is in our defiance. Our anger, our will to stand up for ourselves, and our refusal to be quieted. We will take back what they stole from us. We will show them that they can never rule over us again. The room erupted in cheers. The rebels had one final goal: to strike directly at the heart of the Council's operations. The Council had been hiding in plain sight, controlling Earth from a secret stronghold, but the time had come to break that control. The plan. The mission was risky. The Council's stronghold was heavily guarded, protected by advanced technology and well-trained soldiers. But the rebels knew they had one advantage that the Council never anticipated: unity. For the first time in history, humanity had come together, each individual casting aside their personal differences for the common good. It was a force the Council had never encountered before, and it was their greatest threat. The rebel forces had hacked into the Council's communication networks, learning everything they could about the stronghold's defenses. They knew that it was not going to be easy. The stronghold was well hidden in a remote sector, far from Earth's atmosphere. But with the help of stolen alien technology, The rebels had created an infiltration plan that relied on both speed and stealth. As the night of the mission drew closer, tensions were high. The rebels knew that this attack would be their last chance to take control. It would either succeed or fail, but either way, they would not back down. The infiltration begins. The night sky was dark, illuminated only by the distant glow of the stars. The rebel fleet, a ragtag collection of ships that had once been used by the Council's peacekeepers, now flew together, united in purpose. Their mission: to breach the Council's stronghold and bring an end to their reign once and for all. The ships slipped past Earth's atmosphere, using cloaking technology to avoid detection. It was a dangerous maneuver, as the Council's surveillance systems were notoriously difficult to bypass. But the rebels were determined. They had no other choice. Inside the stronghold, the Council's leaders were convening in their central command center. They were oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. The rebellious forces had already infiltrated the facility, slipping past security checkpoints, neutralizing guards, and making their way toward the heart of the command center. The rebel leader, along with a small team of the most skilled fighters, reached the central control room. The doors hissed open, and the leader stepped inside, his eyes narrowing as he saw the Council's operations laid out before him. This was the heart of their empire, the nerve center from which they controlled every aspect of life on Earth. But the leader wasn't intimidated. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. "We've come to take back what's ours." The leader's voice rang out, his words carrying across the silent room. "Humanity will never bow to you again." With a single command, the team of rebels disabled the facility's control systems, shutting down the vast network of communication between the Council and Earth. The room filled with the sound of alarms, but it was too late. The heart of the Council's control was in ruins. The battle for control. The stronghold's defenses activated, and the battle began. Rebels clashed with Council soldiers, the sound of gunfire and explosions echoing through the facility. It was chaos, but the rebels fought with everything they had. They knew that this was the last chance to end the Council's hold on humanity. As the leader fought his way through the stronghold, he could feel the power shifting. The Council was losing their grip. The tide was turning, and there was no turning back. The final battle was here, and humanity was no longer willing to play by the rules. Cliffhanger. In the final moments of the battle, the leader faced the last of the Council's commanders. Their eyes locked, one filled with defiance, the other with fear. The leader raised his weapon, ready to finish it once and for all. But just as he was about to strike, a shocking discovery changed everything. The Council had one last secret hidden within their stronghold, a weapon that could change the fate of the entire planet. The leader stared at it in disbelief, realizing that this final weapon was humanity's last obstacle to true freedom. The question now was, could they destroy it before it destroyed everything they had fought for? The stakes had never been higher. The final decision would determine Earth's future, if they survived at all. The battle inside the Council's stronghold raged on, but the rebels were gaining ground. The once impenetrable security systems had been disabled, and the Council's elite soldiers, who had once stood as the ultimate force of authority, were now retreating before humanity's ferocity. Every floor, every hall the rebels pushed through, the sound of gunfire and clashing weapons filled the air. The tide had irrevocably turned, and there was no going back. Yet, despite their success, something darker loomed on the horizon. As the rebel leader and his team advanced deeper into the stronghold, they stumbled upon a hidden chamber, its walls lined with advanced technology and mysterious alien devices. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of power, and in the center, atop a pedestal, lay the Council's most dangerous secret, a weapon unlike anything humanity had ever seen. The rebel leader stared at it, disbelief flooding his mind. The weapon was a massive, otherworldly device, part machine, part organic. Its sleek, almost living design pulsed with an eerie, unnatural energy. It seemed to hum with the power to destroy entire worlds, its dark presence a stark contrast to the otherwise chaotic battle happening throughout the stronghold. This is what they've been hiding," the leader whispered. His voice was filled with dread. The truth hit him like a cold wave. This was not just a weapon of war. It was a weapon of domination. A weapon that could wipe out humanity in an instant. The rebels had come to this stronghold to free themselves from the Council's grip, but this discovery threw everything into question. The weapon, if activated, would annihilate the rebellious forces and the planet itself. It was a last resort, a doomsday device that the Council had kept hidden for centuries, just in case humanity ever turned against them. The leader quickly realized that their mission was far from over. They hadn't just come to take down the Council, they had come to ensure the survival of Earth itself. The decision. With the sound of battle echoing in the halls of the stronghold, the rebel leader faced a terrifying decision. Destroy the weapon and risk everything they had fought for, or leave it intact and risk the Council using it to wipe them out. Commander, one of the rebel soldiers, a seasoned fighter named Lena, burst into the room, breathless. The rest of the stronghold is about to collapse. The Council's forces are retreating, but they've triggered the self-destruct sequence. The leader's mind raced. The collapse of the stronghold meant that they would have limited time to make a decision. Every second counted. Lena's eyes were wide with urgency. "Sir, what do we do with the weapon? If we destroy it, we risk everything. But if we leave it here," she trailed off, her voice tense. "The Council will come back. They'll rebuild it." The leader didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained locked on the weapon as if searching for some kind of answer. For a moment, the room fell silent. The sound of distant explosions and the fierce gunfire from the outer levels of the stronghold faded into the background. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as the weight of the decision pressed heavily on his chest. Finally, he spoke, his voice firm. "We destroy it. We fought this hard to regain our freedom. We won't let them have a weapon that could wipe us out." Lena nodded and moved toward the device, ready to help deactivate it. But before they could make their move, a sharp voice echoed from behind them. "Stop." The rebel leader spun around, his pulse racing. Standing in the doorway was a Council officer, her face pale but determined. She was one of the highest-ranking members of the Council, a figure who had overseen Earth's observation for decades. Her presence was chilling, the final attempt to halt their mission. "You don't understand," she said, her voice cold, but there was a trace of desperation in it. "You think destroying the weapon will save you, but you're wrong. Humanity is nothing more than an experiment to the Council. You were never meant to survive. The weapon is not for destruction. It's for control. If you destroy it, you doom your entire species." The leader stared at her, his mind racing. "You're lying," he spat, his hand gripping his weapon tighter. "You've been controlling us for centuries, manipulating every move we made. Your time is over. Humanity will not bow to you any longer." She shook her head, her lips trembling. "You don't know what you're up against. The weapon is the key to something much greater. You've unlocked a power far beyond what you could ever understand. The Council will rebuild it, and when they do, you'll wish you had let it go." The final decision. There was no time for further discussion. The leader turned to his team and gave the order. "Destroy it. Now." But as they moved to deactivate the weapon, something incredible happened. The entire room seemed to shudder, as if the weapon itself had a mind of its own. The dark energy within it surged violently, pulsing with a force that sent shockwaves through the chamber. The rebel leader staggered back, barely able to keep his balance. "No!" the Council officer screamed, her voice filled with terror. "You don't understand. It's activated. It's going to." Before she could finish her sentence, the weapon exploded with an immense burst of energy. The entire room was engulfed in blinding light. The rebels tried to shield themselves, but the power was overwhelming. The last thing the leader saw before he was knocked unconscious was the Council officer, her face twisted in horror as she was consumed by the explosion. The aftermath. When the leader awoke, the first thing he noticed was the silence. The chaos of battle was gone. The stronghold had been destroyed, its walls shattered, and the rebellion's fight was over. But it wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. The weapon had not only destroyed the Council's stronghold, it had triggered a chain reaction that wiped out much of the Council's remaining forces. The Council officer had been right about one thing. The weapon's power was far beyond their understanding. It was a force that transcended mere destruction. It was a force of transformation. Humanity had won, but at a terrible cost. Earth had been forever changed by the weapon's power. It had freed them from the Council's grip, but it had also unleashed a force they had no idea how to control. The leader, battered and bruised but alive, stood over the ruins of the stronghold. The world would never be the same. There was no going back. The final message. As the dust settled, the leader broadcasted a final message to the people of Earth. His voice was strong, filled with the weight of their victory and their future. We fought to free ourselves from the control of an empire that thought they could shape us into something we were never meant to be. We fought to regain our freedom, and we succeeded. But the war is not over. What we've unleashed is something greater than any of us could understand. The future of humanity lies in our hands. We must rebuild, not just our world, but ourselves. The Council is gone, but we are the ones who will shape our destiny from here on out. And with those words, humanity stood at the precipice of a new world, a world they had earned through defiance, through unity, and through the courage to rise up when everything seemed lost. But the question remained, what would they do with their newfound freedom? And what dangers awaited them in a world where politeness had been forever shattered? Only time would tell.